Retro Future.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, this is Bonsert of Radio Retro Future, and today I'm gonna try to do something a little bit off the cuff. Tomorrow I'll be at Novio Magica, so that will probably pass by the time that I publish this video, but there you go. So, you've been asking me to make more videos on high and low concept, because people seem to be confused on what it is and what it means. And today I was on a Discord server where we had this discussion about what they called character-driven and plot-driven stories. Now, I am not familiar with these terms, but roughly they discussed low and high concept, be it with, well, very unelegant verbiage if you ask me, because every story basically has a plot of some form. We could have an argument about the stories that I write because they are dossiers. They don't really have a story that has a typical middle, beginning, and ending. When it comes to events, it does so when it comes to theme, but that's a different discussion which I might explore in the future and why it is even relevant. But that brings us to the next question. Is it even relevant? Is the difference between high and low concept that important? And I say yes it is. And I've said this many times before, but the reason why I think much of Hollywood sci-fi sucks these days is because they don't know the difference between high and low concept. Hell, a lot of people don't even know what high concept is, which is a very different manner of writing style, because it is the foundation of your creative process and how you approach the core of your story. So what is the difference then? Okay, low concept basically follows the hero's journey. Now, I already made a video regarding do stories need protagonists and how I think that there's too much emphasis on the hero's journey. Please watch that video on that topic. In high concept story, however, it's different, because you don't start with a hero that's gonna be lured out into the wider world because of this horrible event, and now he has to become stronger and overcome obstacles to finally destroy the final boss, and then he lives happily ever after. High concept, it does not work that way. High concept is an exploration, and what I mean by that, it starts off with a subject. It starts off with a simple question. What if a robot from the future comes to the past to kill you? What if you are hunted by an alien in the jungles? What if you wake up in the middle of a zombie apocalypse? I don't even need to say the titles of these videos. You already know what movies I'm referring to simply by the hook. Here's another one that's very popular among the schlock genres. What happens if you combine sharks with tornadoes? Okay, and there's like a whole subgenre, but that all of those are basically high concept. These films and stories are basically just watching these situations unfold. Situations that characters are in, and therefore the characters are not the most important part. Horror is mostly always high concept. Think about like who's the star in Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street, you know, Freddy Krueger, Jason, etc. All these monsters are the stars of the show. They are the high concept. They are the thing that people are fleeing from, and everyone else is either there to die or, you know, find ways to overcome it, find ways to get out of this situation. And I think that's also the appeal of, let's say, horror stories, where people also say, oh my god, these people are so stupid, you know, if I was in this situation, I would do that. I think that's also part of the hook, and why some horror films are written the way they are, because, you know, it makes people like, no, what are you doing? These people are idiots, blah, blah, blah. You know, that's engagement, you know, it's negative engagement, but it's engagement nonetheless. But that brings us to another thing that's often overlooked in this discussion regarding low and high concept, which is that every story needs to have a balance between low and high concept. Yes, you can say this story is conceived as a high concept story, but you need characters that you get invested in. There needs to be a personal stake for the character, and except that those stakes are related to the themes of your concept. Let's say the city is being attacked by a Sharknado. Survive this Sharknado. But it's hard, because the topic, the hero of the film, is really the Sharknado. You know, the survivors are there to get killed. And the same goes with zombies, you know, you need people to die in the zombie genre. So to create a hook, to get people invested in these characters, you need to create a situation where the people are really like, oh, who's gonna live, who's gonna die, yada yada yada. And you know, this is where all the cliches from horror come from. Oh, this is the virginal girl, you know, this is the last girl, blah de blah, etc. So that's with the horror genre. In science fiction, it's a bit more cerebral, would I say. Let's say Blade Runner. Not just, okay, what if you have a society with rogue androids? That's not where the movie stopped. That's not just the core of the series, you know. And then you listen to the creative process of the original author, which was, you know, he saw androids as basically a metaphor for camp commanders during the Holocaust that would complain about all these prisoners screaming in pain through the night, keeping them awake, and of course completely ignoring like the human aspect, you know, the suffering and everything else. He was just bothered that the screams of the prisoners inconvenienced him. That was what he tried to invoke with the androids. He tried to see, okay, what are androids like? These completely unfeeling machines. And of course the question, okay, well, what if you fall in love with one of these unfeeling machines? And there you kind of like get in a strange conflict. Like, can you fall in love with technology? You know, where does the human end and the machine begin? Blah de blah de blah. So it becomes like a genuine exploration of a more complex topic involving ethics, morality, and human nature. And it doesn't necessarily have to have a good ending either. That's one of the liberating things about high concept. I mean, the story is just more meaningful if it ends badly for the characters. I mean, Cyberpunk Edge Runners is an example of that. And some people compare it to Game of Thrones and nihilism. I don't think so. I think it's a morality tale, which is a thing you can more easily do with high concept, because you leave what happens open to the interpretation of the viewer. Like, what is it that they're trying to say here? You know, without getting into the whole death of the author thing, you can have like a discussion. Okay, well, what is the morality tale here? Why do certain events happen in the story? Why does the main character keep watching the urn of his mother, for example? There's all that type of subtle symbolism, and the story does not preach to you. Well, this is the kind of lifestyle this guy has. This is how we visualize things. You can draw your own conclusions from that. And that's what I really enjoy about Cyberpunk Edge Runners. Now, in low concept, you are very different. The relationship between the characters and the world building is different. Whereas you are immediately supposed to be invested in the plight of the character. You know, everyone always mentions Star Wars, and that's what I'll do now as well. Got Luke, he works on this farm, and then he gets his call to action. First he doesn't want to, but then his foster parents are killed, you know, and he kind of like goes on this quest for both revenge, but also to fight for the rebellion and defeat the Empire, yada yada yada. In the end, we've got like the big boss, the big Death Star that goes boom, and beat the same thing in the first film, and then in all the sequels and everything else. Okay, that's the thing with low concept, because everything revolves around the Skywalkers. You cannot discuss the Star Wars universe without mentioning Skywalker, or Darth Vader, or the Emperor, because everything revolves around them. And that's kind of, you should hear the guys of Red Letter Media often say, oh, it's such a small universe. And yes, it's correct, because it's literally a microcosm. This is the thing with most low-concept, hero-focused stories. The world revolves around the characters. And for those who watched my retelling of Last Exile, you'll notice at the end that I kind of like go into this speed mode, because what the story does is that it all revolves around the magical girl. At the start of the series, they have like a guy who's a pilot, and the pilot fights in this war. Events happen during the war, and the guy is fighting and fighting and fighting. And then they come to the point where they have to bring this one girl to this one location to make this one magical thing happen. Everything else just becomes like this white noise. It's not even important anymore. The battle that's taking place, all the lives lost, do not matter anymore. Because, it's all about that one girl now. The battle around it is just there for tension. And that's kind of like the weakness when you make everything revolve around one character. And I had the same thing with my first book, The Wrench in the Machine, because I didn't want to fall into this trap where everything revolves around the main character, Albaro. And Albaro has his own plot, reconvenes with his past. But it's not relevant to the larger story. Like, he plays an important part, but what he does not directly influence the outcome. Like, it influences on individual levels, but whether that the bad guys will win or lose does not depend on his specific actions. You could retell the events of The Wrench in the Machine without Albaro. He's just one of the investigators working on solving the bigger mystery. And I did that very intentionally because I didn't want this world to revolve around like one or two characters. The story, the politics, the nations, they evolve regardless if there is like a guy named Skywalker walking around. And you can do that to Star Wars. Because the Empire revolves around the Emperor, and the Emperor gets killed by Skywalker, and everything evolves around this very small clan of characters, and that's what your series is about. Like, Star Wars is not about, like, the Death Star. The Death Star is, like, this big threat, but it's not what it is about. Death Star could have been anything, any dangerous threat. Like, they treat this in such a childish way, where it's like, well, we had the Death Star in the first film, we had the Death Star in the third film. Well, what if we now have a Death Star that instead of one planet can blow up 3 planets at once? It's such a infantile way of doing things. It's a bad robot way of doing things. That's kind of the shame that the people who made Star Wars, including George Lucas, did not understand it. And this is what you see like with Star Trek Discovery is another example where now the entire Star Trek universe revolves around the main character of the show. I forgot what her name was. This is so different from, let's say, TNG, where you've got this crew and they end up in all these high concept situations. Who watches the Watchers, where they're confronted with the dilemma of we were observing the civilization to see how they were developing, and it kind of like brings the question, well, do you even have a right to spy on us? Do you have a right to do this to us while we have these problems? You're not doing anything to help. And I won't bore you with the whole discussion about the Prime Directive thing that's common among Star Trek fans. It's just one benefit of high concept is that you can use the setting to criticize its own premises. In low concept you can do that, however then you often run into the problem that you're undermining the heroism of its own characters, which, well, is all too common these days. The critique on the happily ever after part. The story ends with, they live happily ever after. But did they? And then you get like this whole spiel like that their relationship is completely ruined and all that stuff. That used to be like fodder for comedy. Robot Chicken did a lot of this stuff. Unfortunately, in the modern day, that has like become the premise for entire TV shows. Arguably, this is the case for one of my favorite shows, I have to admit, The Venture Brothers. But that was clever. That was a clever critique. And it was not necessarily a show about these ridiculous characters, it was a show about dealing with failure. Not meeting people's expectations, but also wanting more out of life. Wanting to be in control of your destiny. Plot, all the scenes are about that question, like, okay, this happens and this creates this situation, now they have this dilemma. They have to confront this topic and that topic. To get back to Star Trek, this was what was refreshing about the Borg at the time. You would see Starfleet interact with all these civilizations, with some exceptions like the Klingon and the Romulans. Everything was hunky-dory, and everybody wanted to be part of the Federation. But then they encountered the Borg. And the Borg only cared about assimilation. And this was not some race they could negotiate with. No, military force was now the only answer, and this changed all of Star Trek. That Star Trek was just about exploration anymore. Now, unfortunately, for those who watch the show know that the Borg kind of like became a villain of the week. They became extremely less intimidating as time went on. And the actual concept that the Borg was supposed to represent was kinda like shoved to the wayside, because no one knew what to do with this extremely powerful enemy that could only be destroyed through military might. However, they were also a fan favorite, and they would be pulled out of the box whenever the ratings were dropping. Hence, we got 7 of 9 in the Star Trek Voyager, which is probably also the best thing that show ever produced. But that's because we then go into the mind like, okay, we don't know what we can do with the Borg as an enemy, but what if we study the Borg as a concept further, like individuals being inserted into this collective and then being pulled out again. Now, there were some great episodes with that, and there were some terrible episodes about it. But the biggest difference between how Voyager handled the concept of the Borg, that it separated its topics in various episodes, some good, some bad, unlike Discovery, which had this spore drive idea, which in itself could be an interesting idea, but they introduced it as a permanent feature. And now every episode had to involve that spore drive, and it had to be taken into account whenever they went anywhere or wanted to do anything. And the problem with Bad Robot in particular is that it's a pump and dump studio who uses the mystery box concept as a way to retain viewer attention but not have a payoff. And the thing with any high concept is eventually it will run out of steam. Predator, for example, very successful franchise. You've got Predator in the jungle, then you have Predator in the concrete jungle. Okay, great. Where are you gonna take Predator next? Predator to the pizzeria? Predator in Japan? Predator Uber driver? Now, of course, they did the Alien versus Predator, where you bash two high concepts together, which, that's what everyone wanted to see. They did this a lot in horror, like Freddy versus Jason, Sherlock Holmes versus James Bond, Star Wars versus Star Trek, the Imperial Inquisition visits a Mormon planet, Cocaine Bear. But with every good thing, at some point you need to say, enough is enough, and call it quits. So, bit of a ramble. My apologies. I thought I'm gonna do this off the cuff because I want to continue work on my other video, my lore video, which is a collaboration with Tinglesmith. So yeah, we're gonna have a guest actor on that. So I want to get back on that as quickly as possible. So this is literally just filler. I hope you enjoyed it regardless. What are your thoughts on this topic? Are you a high concept writer? Do you want to explore high concept more? If you've got particular questions, please submit them so I can respond to those. Because I'm working hard on the RPG and a Dutch translation of The Wrench in the Machine for my Dutch listeners. If you want to read my short stories, by the way, go to REAM Stories, where you can read my short stories for free. Or you can become a member, support this channel, help me pay for my artists, and also get awesome unique things like wallpapers, STLs. With that, I'm gonna bid you adieu, and as always, make things your way.